Nothing like being on time. We're live. We're live, Jeremy.
We did it. We made it.
We made it.
Glory to God.
All right. We're welcome to Lives of the Saints, episode 4. Jeremy is he's going to share a saint with us that I don't even know about. I mean, he gave me the guy's name, but I never did. I didn't have time today to do any reading. So looking forward to it too, Lance. So yeah, I think I'll just let you get started. Well, do we want to give it a few minutes?
Let's wait a minute for some,
let's give it a few minutes.
Yeah. I will, I had some family business to take care of yesterday, so I wasn't able to do it at the regular time, but
yeah,
we're here today.
Hi, Emily. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Hi, Cassandra. I'm going to drop a link in, and I'll just drop it in now. And because we love being able to discuss some of these people's lives, but just hold off until Jeremy gives us this person's life, and then you can join and we'll chat it up.
Yeah, and the one we're sharing tonight, and I still won't announce it yet. The saint we're talking about tonight is not really well known in Orthodoxy. He's probably more well known in Roman Catholicism, but even then, most of the Roman Catholics kind of focus on their modern saints now. They don't really have a practice of like reading the lives of the saints, and so hopefully the person we're going to be talking about tonight will be new for everybody. It'll be exciting.
Right.
This is one of my priests. This is my priest's, one of his favorite saints.
Really?
He's the one who recommended that I read his life. And,
okay, so is this? We talked about doing some of the saints from the British Isles. Is he from the British Isles?
No, he's from Bulgaria, but grew up in Italy.
Oh,
and
interesting.
he lived in the time of, he was in Julius Caesar's army, actually.
Wow.
So I will reveal his name. We're going to be talking about Saint Martin of Tours. All
right.
And so Tours was actually in France, and he was the bishop there, which is why he's known as Saint Martin of Tours.
Okay, I won't ask you any questions. I'll just let you tell the story. We got 10 people in. Do you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Right.
I'll share my screen because I have an icon.
All right.
Okay. Hold on. Share screen. Where is it? That one. Share. Okay. Can you see that?
I got it.
Okay, great. So I'm taking the account of his life from actually 2 different books, and I'll share those afterward. So this is a little bit of a hodgepodge between the two, because I needed to condense it for time. Because the one account, the original account of his life, is like 50 or 60 pages.
So he's well recorded historically then.
Yeah. So this is Saint Martin of Tours, and the person who wrote his life met him toward the end of his life. He journeyed. He went on a pilgrimage he had heard of Saint Martin of Tours, and he gathered stories all along the way, and gathered stories after he met Saint Martin of Tours as well. But then also some of the accounts came directly from Saint Martin of Tours.
Cool.
Like some of the stories from his life.
Oh, Lance knows him.
Saint Martin of Tours was the first saint to be venerated in the West as a saint without dying as a martyr, which is also notable.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did I want to start with? This one. I need my glasses.
I just want to tell Emily I'm so glad you're stuck on McDonald. It'll be hard to get away from him.
Yeah, that's I've only read Lilith, and actually I'm reading The Princess and the Goblin right now.
Okay.
And with my family, and that's been real joy. I wish I would have found McDonald when my kids were younger.
Yeah.
But it's still a fun read, even though my daughter's 17.
Well, I'll tell you, you gotta read them The Golden Key.
Okay. I'll do that
Okay.
next. Okay.
And Emily, if you've got a Spotify account, there's lots of George MacDonald on Spotify for free too, if you have a premium account.
Okay. Saint Martin. May we have his prayers as we share his life. Saint Martin was born in 316 at Sabaria in Pannonia, which is in Hungary, where his father, a Roman army officer, was stationed, but he grew up in Italy at Pavia, the native city of his family. Although his parents were idolaters, Martin began to go to church from the age of 10, and he asked to be received as a catechumen. He heard tell of the exploits of the hermits in the East, and as a 12-year-old, dreamt of leaving the cares of this world far behind by becoming a monk, but he had to obey his parents and join the army, as the law required in those days. Martin did not let military life prevent him putting into practice the holy evangelic virtues. One winter's day, when he was 18 and was stationed at Amiens in Gaul, he met a poor man at the city gate, shivering for want of clothes. He had already given in alms the money he carried with him, but seeing that no one else was moved to pity, he drew his sword, cut his cloak in two, and ignoring the derision of his companions, put one half on the poor man's back and the other on his own. That night, Christ appeared to him, clad in the part of the cloak that he had given away. And the servant of God heard him say to the surrounding multitude of angels, Martin, while still a catechumen, has clothed me in his garment. He received holy baptism soon after this incident and wanted to leave the army to become a monk, but in the end he deferred to the wishes of his commanding officer and remained a soldier, even though he was a monk in the depths of his heart. In fact, it was only many years later, in 356, that he was an officer of the Imperial Guard that he obtained his discharge. I think there was another story in this other account that I wanted to share. Let me look. Oh, yeah, I was going to share when he was in the army. Then the barbarians invaded Gaul, and the Caesar Julian assembled his army at the city of Vangones, I can't say these words, Vangones, and set about paying the soldiers a bonus. They were called out one by one, as was the custom, until it was Martin's turn. Then he judged that the time was right to request his discharge, for he thought it would be dishonest to accept a bonus payment if he did not intend to serve as a soldier. So he said to the Caesar, up until now, I have fought for you. Allow me to go fight for God. Let someone who intends to fight accept your bonus. I am a soldier of Christ. I am not allowed to fight. The tyrant was furious at these words and claimed that Martin was refusing to do his duty as a soldier, not out of religious conviction, but out of fear of the battle that was to take place the next day. But Martin was not intimidated. In fact, he stood all the more firm when terror tactics were used against him. If, he replied, you ascribe this to cowardice rather than to faith, tomorrow I shall stand unarmed before the front lines, with neither shield nor helmet, but with the sign of the cross to protect me. In the name of the Lord Jesus, I will push my way into the enemy's formations without being harmed. The order was therefore given for him to be taken back and thrown into prison so that he would keep his promise to be thrust unarmed at the barbarians. Next day, the enemy sent envoys to sue for peace, surrendering themselves and all their belongings. Who then could doubt that this victory was really due to the blessed man to whom it was granted not to be sent unarmed into battle? Although the good Lord could have kept his soldier safe amidst the swords and weapons of the enemy, he nonetheless removed the necessity for battle so that the holy man's gaze would not be outraged even by the deaths of others. For it was right that Christ should offer his soldier no other victory than one where no one died and where the enemy was driven to surrender without bloodshed. So after he left the army, he went to find Saint Hilary. And Saint Hilary was alive. Saint Hilary was his spiritual father. So he went to St. Hilary's monastery and served under him. And so I'm, like I said, I'm kind of abridging this because it's a very long account. Okay, so he had found St. Hilary and began to serve under him as a monk. And so then he also heard that the Arians were making big pushes, and he wanted to go and save his parents. So he asked St. Hilary if he could go live with his parents. First of all, while crossing the Alps, he lost his way and fell among brigands. When one of these raised his axe and prepared to strike Martin on the head, another restrained his arm as he was about to strike. However, they tied Martin's hands behind his back and handed him over to one of the brigands to be guarded and stripped of his belongings. When this brigand had led him to a more remote spot and began to question him as to who he was, Martin replied that he was a Christian. The brigand asked whether he was frightened. Then Martin declared with firm conviction that he had never felt so safe, because he knew that the Lord's mercy was closest at hand when one was in danger. Instead, Martin felt sorry for him, because being a brigand, he was unworthy of Christ's mercy. Martin undertook to set forth the gospel and preached the word of God to the brigand. To cut a long story short, the brigand was converted to the faith and accompanied Martin to set him on the right road, begging him to pray to the Lord on his behalf. This same man was later seen leading a religious life, and in fact, the story I have just related is said to have been heard from him. Continuing on his way, Martin had passed Milan when the devil, taking on human form, came to him and asked where he was going. Receiving Martin's reply to the effect that he was going where the Lord called him, he said to Martin, "Wherever you go and whatever you attempt, the devil will oppose you." Then Martin answered in the words of the prophet, "The Lord is my helper. I will not fear what a man can do to me." At once the enemy disappeared from his sight. And so he carried out his intention to set his mother free from the error of paganism, while Martin's father continued in wickedness. However, Martin saved many by his example. By then, the Arian heresy had spread throughout the world, and especially in Illyricum. Since Martin was almost the only one to fight most strenuously against the heretical beliefs of the priests, and because many tortures were inflicted on him, for he was publicly beaten and finally driven to leave the city, he returned to Italy. When he learned that the church in Gaul had also been thrown into confusion by the departure of St. Hilary, who had been driven into exile by the power of the heretics, Martin established a monastic cell for himself in Milan. There, too, Auxentius, the chief investigator and leader of the Arians, persecuted him relentlessly. He inflicted many injuries on Martin and expelled him from the city. Judging it necessary to yield to circumstances, Martin withdrew to an island called Gallinara, accompanied by a priest, a man of great virtues. Here he lived for a time on the roots of grasses. During that period, he ate some hellebore, a plant said to be poisonous. But when he felt the power of the poison attacking him and death close at hand, he managed by his prayers to repel the danger threatening him, and immediately all the pain left him. Not long afterwards, when he learnt that the emperor had now repented and had granted St. Hilary permission to return from exile, Martin set out for Rome to try and meet Hilary there. As Hilary had already passed through, Martin followed in his footsteps to Poitiers, where he was most warmly welcomed by Hilary. Martin then erected a monastic cell for himself, not far from the town. At that time, a certain catechumen attached himself to him, wishing to learn how to live according to the teachings of a holy man. A few days later, this man fell sick, suffering from violent attacks of fever. It happened that Martin had just gone away. After an absence of 3 days, he returned to find a lifeless body. Death had come so suddenly that the man had departed this mortal life without being baptized. The grieving brothers were performing their sorrowful duties around the body laid out in their midst when Martin came running up, weeping and wailing. But then, as his whole mind became filled with the Holy Spirit, he told the others to leave the little room where the body lay. He locked the door and threw himself down upon the lifeless limbs of the dead brother. And when Martin had lain in prayer for a while and felt that the power of the Lord was present through the Spirit, He raised himself a little and stared into the dead man's face, fearlessly awaiting the outcome of his prayers and the Lord's mercy. 2 hours had scarcely passed when he saw the dead man slowly move each limb and open his eyes, blinking to regain his sight. Then he turned with a great cry to the Lord, filling the tiny cell with shouts of thanksgiving. On hearing this, those who had been standing outside immediately rushed in. It was an extraordinary sight. They saw the man whom they had left as dead now alive, and so, restored to life, he immediately underwent baptism. He lived for many years afterwards and was the first to provide evidence and testimony to Martin's spiritual powers. He used to relate how when he left the body, he was taken to the court of the judge. And when he heard the grim sentence that he was to be condemned to the dark places and to the hordes of common people, then 2 angels pointed out to the judge that this was the man for whom Martin was praying, and so the order was given for him to be taken back by the 2 angels, handed over to Martin, and restored to his former life. It was from that moment that the name of the blessed man first shone forth, so that he who was already considered by everyone to be a holy man was now also considered truly worthy of the apostles. There's a couple of more accounts of him raising people from the dead. There's also a couple of accounts of him, a couple more accounts of him healing people, and then also casting out demons. Let's see. So then he was called to be the bishop, and they actually used a trick. So I'm going back to the text. At about this time, Martin was considered as a candidate for the bishopric of Tours, but since he could not easily be torn from his cell, a certain Rusticius, one of the citizens, pretending that his wife was ill, threw himself at Martin's feet, thus managing to make him come out. Then, when crowds of citizens had been arranged along the route, Martin was escorted as far as the city, more or less under guard. What was extraordinary was that an incredible number of people, not only from that town, but also from neighboring towns, gathered to cast their votes. They all shared one will, one wish, one opinion. Martin was the most worthy to become bishop, and fortunate was the church which had such a bishop. A few, however, including some of the bishops who had been summoned to install the prelate, wickedly rejected him, saying that he was despicable. A person with such a scruffy appearance, dirty clothes, and unkempt hair was unworthy of the episcopate. But those who had a more sensible attitude found that such foolishness ridiculous. While wishing to find fault with him, these bishops were actually proclaiming him to be an outstanding person. In fact, they were unable to do anything other than what the people were planning in accordance with the Lord's will. However, among the bishops present, someone called Defensor is said particularly to have opposed Martin. In this connection, it was noted that he was afterwards severely reprimanded by a reading from the prophets. For it happened that the reader whose turn it was to read on that day had been prevented by the crowds from arriving, and the men in charge were anxiously awaiting the man who was missing, when one of the bystanders took the psalter and seized upon the first verse he came to. This is the psalm verse. Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings you have perfected praise because of your enemies, so that you might destroy the enemy and the defender. So again, the man's name who was opposing him was named Defensor.
Sounds like something from Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, nice. When he read this, no, it's okay. When he read this, the cries of the people rose up and the opposition party was thrown into confusion. They believed that it had been by God's will that this particular psalm had been read so that Defensor might hear this testimony to his deeds. He who out of the mouths of babes and sucklings had been at the same time revealed as the enemy and destroyed now that the Lord's praise had been perfected in Martin. I'll read this short paragraph. This is really beautiful. It is not in our power to give a full account of his behavior and his greatness after he had succeeded to the episcopate. In fact, with the utmost constancy, he continued the same as before. There was the same humility of heart, the same poverty of clothing, Full of authority and grace, he fulfilled the high office of bishop without abandoning his monastic commitment and virtue. For a time, therefore, he used a little cell adjoining the church. Then, when he could no longer bear the disturbance caused by those who flocked to see him, he built himself a cell some 2 miles outside the city. This place was so remote and secluded that it was equal to the solitude of the desert, for on one side it was bounded by the sheer rock of a high mountain, while on the level side it was enclosed by a gentle bend in the river Lore. Lear? I don't know, I'm sorry. It could be approached by only one path, and that a very narrow one. Martin lived in a small cell made out of wood, and a number of the brothers lived in a similar manner, but most of them had made shelters for themselves by hollowing out the rock of the mountain which overlooked the place. There were about 80 disciples who had chosen to lead a life in accordance with their blessed master's example. No one there possessed anything of his own. Everything was shared. They were not allowed to buy or sell anything, as the practice was with most monks. No craft was practiced there, apart from that of the scribes. The young were set to this task, while the older ones spent their time in prayer. It was rare for anyone to leave his own cell, except when they gathered at the place of prayer. They all received their food together after the period of fasting. No one drank any wine unless illness forced him to do so. Most of them were dressed in camel-skin garments. They considered the wearing of any softer material to be reprehensible. This is all the more remarkable since many of them were said to be noblemen who had been brought up in a very different way, but had voluntarily adopted this life of humility and endurance. Later we saw several of them become bishops. For what city or church did not long to have a priest from Martin's monastery? So yeah, he continued many miracles. There was one here I wanted to share. Oh, okay. He also was overthrowing paganism. So this is an account of him destroying a temple. Again, when he had destroyed a very ancient temple in a certain village and had undertaken to chop down a pine tree standing beside the shrine, the priest of that temple, together with a whole crowd of pagans, began to put up resistance. And although these people had, at the Lord's command, done nothing while the temple was being knocked down, they refused to allow the tree to be cut down. Martin was at pains to make it clear to them that there was nothing sacred about a tree stump. They should rather follow God, whose servant he was. In fact, they ought to chop down that tree because it was consecrated to a demon. Then one of them, who was bolder than the rest, said, "If you have any faith in your God, whom you claim to worship, we will cut down this tree ourselves, and you must catch it as it falls. If your Lord is with you, as you claim, you will escape injury." Then Martin promised that he would do so far as his confidence in the Lord made him fearless. At this point, the whole crowd of pagans agreed to those terms, and they readily assented to the loss of their tree, as long as it managed to crush the enemy of their rights as it fell. And so, when the pine tree began to lean to one side, so that there was no doubt as to which way it would fall when it was cut down, Martin was tied up and placed, as the peasants wished, in the spot where everyone was convinced that the tree would fall. They began to chop at the pine with great joy and excitement. A crowd of amazed onlookers stood at a distance, and now the pine was gradually starting to sway to and fro, and on the point of falling, it threatened its own destruction. Standing some way away, the monks grew pale, terrified by the danger which was now close at hand. They had lost all hope and confidence, and were now only awaiting Martin's death. But he trusted in the Lord and waited without fear. The pine gave a crashing noise as it fell, and Martin raised his hand to meet it as it was falling. As it came crashing down on top of him, and he made the sign of the cross to block the tree's path. As a result, the tree fell in a different place. You would have thought that it had been pushed back by some kind of whirlwind, so that it came close to crushing the country folk who had been standing by in a safe place. Then shouts rose to the skies, for the pagans were shocked by the miracle, while the monks wept for joy, and the name of Christ was proclaimed by all of them together. It was generally agreed that on that day salvation came to that region, for there was hardly anyone in that huge crowd of pagans who did not ask for the laying on of hands and who did not believe in the Lord Jesus, abandoning the terror of impiety. It is true that before Martin came there, there were only a very few, or rather, there was hardly anyone in those regions who had received the name of Christ. But by means of his miracles and his example, the name of Christ grew so strong that there was no longer any place in that area which was not full of churches or monasteries filled with people. For in those places where he had destroyed the pagan shrines, he immediately built either churches or monasteries. I'm just looking for the next part I wanted to read. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. There's one more story I'll share, and then I'll share like the story of his repose.
This guy was busy.
Yeah, it is certain that angels often appeared to Martin, even going so far as to enter into conversation and talk with him. But as for the devil, Martin could see him so easily and so clearly that whether he retained his own form or turned himself into various evil shapes, Martin could recognize him, whatever his disguise. But when the devil realized that he could not escape, he would frequently hurl abuse at Martin because he was unable to deceive him by his wiles. One time he burst into Martin's cell with a loud roar, holding in his hand a bull's bloody horn. He showed his bloody hand, and glorying in the crime he had just committed, he said, "Where is your power, Martin? I have just killed one of your friends." Then Martin called the brothers together and told them what the devil had revealed. He told them to go carefully around all the cells to find out who had suffered this fate. They reported that none of the monks was missing, but that one peasant, hired to transport some wood, had gone into the forest. Martin therefore ordered some of them to go and meet him. He was found not far from the monastery, already on the point of death. As he breathed his last, he revealed to the brothers the cause of his deadly wound. When his oxen were yoked together, as he was straightening the straps which had come undone, an ox shook his head free and drove his horns into the peasant's groin. A short while later, he yielded up his life. It is for you to decide by what judgment the Lord this power was granted to the devil. What was amazing about Martin was that he foresaw long in advance not only what we mentioned earlier, but many things of this kind whenever they happened, for he made them known to the brothers as soon as they were revealed to him. The devil appeared to Martin in the most diverse forms in his attempts to trick the holy man by means of 1,000 harmful devices. Sometimes he appeared transformed into the person of Jupiter, sometimes that of Mercury or Hermes, and often even of Venus and Minerva. Martin, always unafraid, protected himself against him by making the sign of the cross and with the help of prayer. Often one could hear abuse hurled at him by the throng of demons using foul language, but Martin knew that all these things were deceptive and an illusion, and was therefore unmoved by their taunts. Some of the brothers also claimed that they had heard a demon accusing Martin in foul language of having received into the monastery after their conversion some brothers who had once lost the grace of baptism as a result of various sins, and the demon had set forth their individual sins. Martin resisted the devil and answered firmly that the old faults had been purged away by a better way of life. By the Lord's mercy, those who had ceased to sin would be absolved from their sins. When the devil retorted that forgiveness was not appropriate for guilty people and that no mercy could be obtained from the Lord for those who had once fallen into error, Martin is said to have then exclaimed in these words, "If you wretched creature, ceased to persecute people and repented of your deeds, particularly at this time when the day of judgment is close at hand, then I, who trust completely in the Lord Jesus Christ, would promise you mercy." How saintly of Martin to anticipate the Lord's goodness. Although he was unable to offer a guarantee of it, he did show his feelings. And since we have started to discuss the devil and his devices, it does not seem irrelevant. In fact, it seems to be at the heart of the matter to mention that what happened, for a good deal of Martin's special powers are revealed in this event, and a story which has the status of a miracle should rightly be recorded as a warning in case anything similar should occur in the future. Okay. And then, all right. So I'll read right at the end of his life, and then I'll read what the biographer said about him, which is so beautiful. Sorry. Mm-hmm. But like Christ and all his faithful disciples, St. Martin had to endure trials. Some of his fellow bishops, jealous of his credit with the magnates and with the people, spoke ill of him, and even some of his relatives despised and unjustly accused him. Martin bore all such reproaches with unwavering charity and equanimity. One day he was taken ill in a country parish where he had gone, in spite of his 81 years, to make peace among the local clergy. He gathered his disciples and told them of his coming death. As they lamented and begged him not to leave them orphans, turning to the Lord, he responded, Lord, if thy people need me, I am willing to persevere in the defense of thy flock. Thy will be done. He continued in prayer until the end and would have nothing done for his comfort. As he lay on a bed of sackcloth and ashes, he said, It is unfitting for a Christian to die on anything but ashes. I would have sinned in giving you any other example. When the devil appeared in order to tempt him for the last time, the saint mocked him, saying, You will find nothing in me that belongs to you. Abraham's bosom is about to receive me. As he said these words, he gave up his soul to God, his face shining at the moment like the face of an angel. From his appearance, Martin seemed already to be in the glory of the future resurrection, clothed in other flesh. He died on the 8th of November, 397. His funeral service took place at Tours on the 11th of November, and the 11th of November is the day that we commemorate him, in the presence of a vast concourse of the faithful from the neighboring cities and surrounding countryside. And then this is one final tribute that I'll read that was written by the biographer. No one ever saw him angry, never worked up, never mournful, never laughing. He was always one and the same. Bearing an expression of joy that was in some way heavenly, he seemed above human nature. There was never anything on his lips except Christ, never anything in his heart except devotion, peace, and forgiveness. He often used to weep even for the sins of those who appeared to be his critics and who tore at him with their poisonous tongues and with viperous jaws while he remained detached and calm. In fact, we know some people who envied his virtue and his life and who hated in him what they did not see in themselves and what they were unable to imitate. And it was said, what a grievous and lamentable scandal, that most of his critics, few in number though they were actually bishops. And it is certainly unnecessary to name them, although many of them bark at us too. It will suffice that if any one of them should read this and recognize the truth, he should blush with shame, for if he grows angry, he will be admitting that he is the one who is meant, although we might have had others in mind. But we cannot evade the fact that if there are people of this kind, they will hate us as well as a man like Martin. I am certain that this little work will please all holy people. For the rest, should anyone read this without faith, he will be sinning. Driven to write by faith in these things and by the love of Christ, I am confident that I have given a clear account of things and spoken the truth, and the reward prepared by God, as I hope, will await not whoever reads this, but whoever believes it.
I'm sure you could go on and on.
Yeah. I cut out a lot. There's a lot of stories in there of healing and of pagan temple conversions and pagan temple destruction and exorcisms and bringing people back to life. He brought like 2 or 3 people back to life. So,
can you tell us anything about the icon?
Yes. So the icon is it's let me look at it bigger. It's the story of his life when he was 18 years old and he saw the homeless man. It was very cold. It was like a winter day, and the man was naked. And there were other wealthy people who were passing by him. And St. Martin had already given away everything else he had except his cloak. and he didn't have any money. He had already given it away that day. So he cut his cloak in half, and he kept half of it, and he gave the other half to the homeless man, or to the beggar. And then that night, St. Martin had a dream where Christ appeared to him wearing that same cloak. And you can see that up here in the top of the icon.
Okay. What's the significance of the mountain and the city? Is that where he came from and where he went to, or?
Yeah, he was coming. The mountains typically represent the wilderness, and he was coming into the city to meet Saint Hilary.
Okay, right.
So.
Okay. Well, that was great, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's really a beautiful story. So the account that this is the original account that my priest told me about. There's a book called, oh, come on, focus.
It's blurring.
Focus. Anyway, it says Early Christian Lives is the name of the book. It's a Penguin classic. It's got the life of St. Anthony the Great, and then it's got some other early lives of saints. And this is a really great collection. My priest told me to read St. Martin first and then to read the others. So we'll be working on that. But and then because the account was so long, I took some of the condensed parts from this series. This is this. Ooh, it focuses for just a second. The Synaxarion. Yeah. The Synaxarion, and this is one of 6 volumes, and it has Lives of the Saints for every day. It has accounts of their lives.
Okay.
So it's a little more of a summarized version of the life of St. Martin, but there weren't any of the good miracles in there, so I had to pull those from the original account.
Right. Yeah, there's this golden thread of compassion, empathy, and humility, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But
and sobriety, right? I really liked that at the end where he wasn't caught up in emotional responses. He was just always filled with like a peace and a joy.
Yeah, I was glad to hear that he was full of joy, because when it said that he never laughed, I was like, uh-oh. Was he one of those real serious guys, that you just don't want to be around?
Yeah, I thought of McMo on that one, where McMo was upset when Jonathan said that Jesus never laughed. He was like, what?
Yeah.
But here's another account of a saint who didn't laugh, but he felt immense joy.
Yeah. I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't laugh, but I laugh all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's either laugh or cry, right? So
maybe, yeah.
Although I do a lot of both.
Yeah. Yeah. There was something else I wanted to mention. I just find it, I watched a talk that, I can't remember his name now. I sent it to you. Remember George? What's his name?
Calchu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About prayer, Father George. And I think he's also a saint, right?
He is,
or will be.
No, he is now. Yeah, he was just canonized.
And then I found out, because of the algorithm, that he's also Frederica Matthew Green. You know her? Frederica Matthews Green.
Mm-hmm.
He was her spiritual father.
Yes.
And she gave a little talk about him. It's just really interesting. Like, he tells a story in there about how, what was I'm so bad with these Romanian names. What was the leader of Romania? Ceausescu? That was his name?
Yes. Yeah.
He sent a couple of murderers to Father George's, to live with Father George in his cell and just murder him, right? Yeah. Get him gone. And apparently, she told the story. Apparently, someone went into the cell the next morning, and an uncreated light filled the whole cell, and the 2 men and Father George were on their knees praying.
Yeah.
It's just a hopeless battle sometimes with these people.
Yeah.
I thought of it when you were talking about the brigand
Oh yes.
Mar
Yeah.
with St. Martin, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I thought of our evangelical friends there, where St. Martin took the opportunity to preach the gospel to the brigand and converted him,
Yeah,
right? While he's
I love
in
it.
chains preparing to be killed. I thought that was pretty beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's really a lot of beautiful stories from the life of St. Martin. And like you said, he was very humble and just had that deep desire from very early age to be a monk and
and
to
he's
serve.
yeah, that's another it's not always the case. St. Mary of Egypt is a good example, but, um, there are a lot of saints in the church who have, from early childhood on, a very close relationship to or I don't know, a spiritual intuition or something like that.
Yeah.
How to put it. I just put another link in the chat if anybody wants to join. It'd be fun if you did. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think Shari mentioned at the beginning we were going to start doing some of the Western saints and especially saints from the British Isles and from Ireland. So that should be a lot of fun. I found a really good list. So, and I wasn't familiar with a lot of them, so I've been working through that and learning more about them.
Yeah.
But I
There's
felt
some really
compelled by my priest to talk about St. Martin this week.
there's some really interesting, saints from the British Isles, early ones.
Mm,
I mean, there's
yeah.
a lot of them we're familiar with, but there are some quite unknown ones. So yeah, they're good. They have a very mythical edge to them. I just have to let my dog out here.
Sure. Now I have to come up with something to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm just
I'm
feeling
here.
dead noise, feeling dead air. Okay. Whew. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. So he was quite early, eh?
Yeah.
397.
Yeah. He died in 397. So, yeah, he was the first saint who was commemorated without being a martyr. He was the first one who was venerated in the West. I don't know who the first one was in the East, but he was the first Western saint to be venerated without being a martyr.
Is he celebrated on the same day in the Catholic Church as the Orthodox Church?
I'm not
No, eh?
sure. I believe yes, I believe so, but I didn't check that.
One of the other things that stood out to me about that story was how um, much people traveled.
Yeah.
Back in the day, like he was Roman from born in Hungary, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Grew up in Italy,
Yep.
went to France.
Yep. Served in Gaul. Yeah. As
Yeah,
a soldier. Yeah.
yeah.
And then was in Tours as a bishop. Yeah.
And these
Well,
people were
the Romans
moving
made good
around.
roads.
Yeah,
That helped, right? I
that's
mean,
true, yeah, that's true.
yeah, it was
And
definitely facilitated.
they had lots of people to tyrannize. Well, I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean,
I don't think it was tyranny the whole
I don't
time.
think it was either, actually, like,
Yeah.
just down the road from,
When you don't have kids, you have time to walk. That's funny.
True. Um, down the road from where my daughter lives is a place called Vindonissa. It was a Roman city
Hmm.
in Switzerland. Um, I remember taking the kids there when they were all really little,
Yeah.
with my husband, to go see it. There's a lot of it is under a freeway. Like, they just it's so sad, but, like, there's only so much room, in Switzerland,
Yeah.
and
Right.
they can't really afford to just have these huge tourist attractions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. I remember walking home, like, walking to our parked car after we were, touring around. They have, like, a small Coliseum type thing there, and it's pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
And we were walking past a farmer's field, and he had harvested, so it was just stubble in the field. And you could see bits of clay, right? And it was like Roman tile.
What?
In the dirt. And so my husband was, he just hopped off the sidewalk into the field, and he was kicking through the dirt, and he was picking up really nice pieces that had little bits of relief on them. Or you could actually see like a finger mark where somebody had made a corner on the piece.
Unbelievable. Wow.
And so we collected up, you're not supposed to, but we collected up a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And then when we redid our kitchen, we tiled them in as a border.
Oh, nice.
Top.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was fun.
Yeah. That's really cool.
But imagine, just like Roman tiles just kicking around.
Oh man, I know. Yeah. It's wild. It's hard for us as Americans to imagine that, right? Like it's like because everything's so young here. I mean, there are some ruins. There's some Native American ruins that go way back, but not many. Most of there's just not much here.
They didn't have.
They were nomads.
Yeah, and they worked with natural building materials that just decayed into the ground.
Yeah.
There was another time when my husband and I went. The only time we ever traveled together since we've had this farm, we were at my daughter's for Christmas, and there was a big hullabaloo because they were digging a foundation for a new apartment building in the village, and they found this whole section of a Roman bakery, and these beehive ovens and all this stuff. So they excavated it so they could take photographs and take whatever things out of there that they wanted, and then they just built the apartment building on top of it.
What do you do?
We got to go look at it.
That's wild. Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, imagine. Imagine. Yeah. And then when I was there this year, she lives in a medieval town. It's about 800 years old, and she lives in the old part of the town. And they've decided to put in I'm not sure, it's not new sewage system. It's like heat pumps for everyone kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes through the old city. Hey, Lance.
There's Lance.
And so they were digging up the centers of all these cobblestone streets. And they were digging down, I don't know, about 10 feet down.
Yeah.
And I just thought, man, imagine the things they're going to find under there. Like it's just been centuries.
Yeah. Wow. I know. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to think about over here, right? Like I said, everything's so new here, and we also don't build a lot of buildings to last. Most of our buildings get knocked down and built over too, right? Most of the old houses, and there aren't a lot of people standing around either. So that's wild.
So Lance, how did you like St. Martin? Apparently you knew him. You're muted.
You're muted, sir.
Yeah, no, I had my priest in Kansas City always read from the Synaxarion, whenever the days when we have different services or whatever, and then we read about St. Martin of Tours there. I thought it was fascinating, and I really liked that. You mentioned stuff about people that when you're young. What I liked was a little thing about his story was, so even before he was in the church and everything else, so he modeled, it's the accessibility of sainthood, right? So he modeled it by sharing his cloak, and Jesus, the whole idea, when you do it to unto them, you do it unto me. I mean, I'm really surprised at I think I've been noticing quite a bit. Of course, there's the martyrs and there's stuff like that, but quite a few saints. It's very accessible. You don't have to be highly educated. You don't have to come from all those fancy things or whatever. I mean, although he's gave up some of his. A lot of folks walked away from a lot of money or certain sort of status in their families or whatever. But I'm just kind of in that. How that hits me is it's like, hey, Lance, there's no excuse.
Yeah.
Tell me about it, Lance. Now that I'm doing
There's
live,
no excuse.
if I wasn't married, I'd be off to a monastery like tomorrow. Honestly, I would.
Exactly. I told that to my priest, and he said, well, that's wonderful, but he's like, but you are, and you have kids, and you know what I mean, that you have a life, those
Yeah.
sorts of
Too
things.
late.
Yep. So, but yeah, no, there's something. I mean, you've proven it because you actually moved to the bush, and in many ways live that life in some ways.
Some ways,
Yeah.
but I would have been sleeping on a bed of sackcloth and ashes too if I was there. Just like, nope.
Nothing wrong with that.
No.
I've been trying to practice little ways of being less comfortable through the day. I've realized that like I spent a lot of my life like seeking comfort and like wanting to always just be comfortable. And it's like, I don't know, made me soft. Makes me feel like a city guy.
Well, if I'm honest, that's a lot of the reason why. I mean, not that I want to be a monk, but just making things a little more difficult for myself. I learned from homesteading. And also, well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, it seems like that's been my whole life. It just hasn't been easy,
Yeah.
And like getting married, moving to Switzerland, not speaking the language. I learned it just by listening. I couldn't take classes. A lot of things were done the hard way. But especially like physically, we never had any machinery. Everything was done by hand. And my husband did the bulk of the hard, heavy lifting, but all the weeding, we didn't use chemicals, just it's either time or money, right? And we just spent a lot of time doing this stuff. And for me, that kind of life, well, first of all, it's a slow life. You have to be patient, right?
Yeah.
Like when you plant a cucumber seed, you have to wait.
You don't have salad that night. Yeah.
No. And you got to plan ahead because, like you said, you can't have, if you want to have, like my husband was laughing because when I came home from Switzerland, he had planted a ton of salads and they all came ready at the same time, and he didn't put any new seed in time. So now we're in this. Well, he is. I'm not really eating salad, but he's in this dry spell where he doesn't have any salad. He did it to himself. Because he didn't think ahead. But what I wanted to say was that's a big reason why I don't have a phone. It's not necessarily because I think a phone is bad or I think no one should have a phone. I don't have those kinds of judgments. Everybody has to do what everybody needs to do, and God will tell you what you need to do. But I just know for myself, my life has been a lot more interesting without a phone. I've been able to see things that people don't see because they have a phone. I could see what the phone is doing to people because I don't have a phone. I can see what the phone does to commerce. I can see what it does to all kinds of things, like just the fact that you can't buy a stupid little air fryer that doesn't have an app.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, the phone has, now it's the appliances are married to the phone. And if you don't have a phone, that matters, right? If you have a phone, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And then you're just like, oh yeah, I'll take that one. I got a phone. It's not a big deal. You don't even notice. So there's a lot of things that are available to me, I think, that aren't available to other people. I'm just using the phone as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't want to lose that perspective by getting a phone. I feel like I'm a little ahead of the game.
I remember when they first started coming out, like even before smartphones, when it was just cell phones, and my boss wanted to get me one. He's like, yeah, we're going to buy you a phone. I'm like, okay. What for? He's like, well, we can call you after hours in case there's issues. I'm like, okay. And then I just turned it off when I got home. I was like, you can't, you want to buy me a phone, that's fine, but it's not a leash. Like, you pay me to be there when I'm there. You're not paying me to be on call, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and I said that. I was like, yeah, you can pay me. If you want to pay me to be on call, I guess we can do that. And he was like, well, I bought your phone. I'm like, well, I turn it on when I'm at work. Thank you.
I bought your phone. Is that like buying a slave?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. Well, yeah, that's why I resisted it. I hated it. I was an early adopter in some ways, and then but with phones, I was like, no. Like, even smartphones, I was like, it took me a long time. I finally had to get one for work because everybody was texting for communication, for coordination and stuff. I had to get one. And now with family and everything, you know, it's just kind of, I hate it. It's a necessary evil, but
not for me.
It's not fun.
My son gave me one for Christmas, and I'm like, oh, a new camera.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, Mom, you know, you could put a SIM card in it. I'm like, or not.
Right. Yeah.
It's not happening.
Yeah. I could just take pictures with it.
I can take pictures, and I can make an emergency call with it without a SIM card.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I talked to Tyler about this, and you know, we actually understand what life was like before a phone for those of us who even had that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we can remember, and we realize, oh, we could live and do everything, you know, it was okay, right? Like, it was okay. And you can look back to think it was, you know, there were more natural work hours, you know, because your boss wasn't going to call you on your
that was a huge
phone.
deal for me.
There was a civility about that, you know, it had to be something like an emergency or something. Now it's just, you know, you're constantly.
Yeah, there were more boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah, but like Tyler talked about, and I just think about my 20-somethings, you know, just the thought of them, like when I've had conversations and, you know, if my work didn't require it, and it does require it, part of what I'm doing is setting up systems for people to work more efficiently and make it easier for people that I support in my organization to do things. And a lot of those things, if they have, you know, if they can just go on their phone and approve things, expenses and stuff like that, it becomes really easy. It saves them a lot of time, right? Certainly better than using paper and stuff like that, because that just, you know, everything else. And so I'm sitting here working like in the belly of the automation beast, because that's kind of what I have to do to make things more efficient. And, you know, if I didn't have to use it for my work, I am totally to the point now that I would get an untrackable, you know, I might just have a cell phone, you know, old school flip, nothing else on it. Just you could have it if you need an emergency. It's like, it'd be nice to have, you know, they're super nice to have when you have a flat tire out in the country. You call someone.
Well, not at my house, because I don't even have cell service. So I remember one time I was driving home from Vancouver, and I was about, I don't know, 4 kilometers from my house, and my axle fell out of my car. I had this really old Justy. It was like a 1987 Justy, Subaru Justy. It was the best car ever. And I think I paid $450 for it. I was so proud of it. And it was my first car that I bought myself. I bought this, you know, it was $450. Anyway, coming over Vancouver, suddenly the wheels just stopped turning. Oh, I'm sitting on the side of the road. And I had phoned, we had a thing where I would phone my husband from town, from the grocery store, and I would say, I'm on my way home because it's an hour. And it was wintertime. And so if, you know, you don't show up in an hour and a half, then someone has to go look for you. That was the rule.
Yeah.
And I waited out on the road for 3 hours. And by the time he showed up, I was so pissed. I was just fuming.
What happened to the hour and a half rule?
Yeah, I know. But I was thinking I can't even walk because it was like minus 25, 30 or something. And so, you know, we get in the truck and I'm just ranting. The kids are with him. And I'm ranting. I'm getting a cell phone. You know, my son goes, Mom, you can't get a cell phone. I'm like, don't tell me what I can't do. And he goes, Mom, we have no cell service. And I'm like, oh, crap. So it wouldn't have worked anyway.
I think it'll be interesting because you know, certain people, there'll be certain younger people that realize that, and this thing's just going, this attention monster, it's just going to get worse and worse and more connected and stuff. They're going to control you over with this stuff. You know, you're starting to see it, like, you there will be some, and so kind of the revolutionary or countercultural thing will be some young people will try and break away from it. You're already starting to see it. A lot of young people are trying to think about, kind of what you and your husband did. I mean, there literally are people just trying to get off the grid and do those sorts of things. So it'll be interesting. I don't know how many young people will realize just how I just know how damaging where we're heading to with respect to that. Like you talked about, you just what you had to be able to do is to be able to see. And the other thing that I just worry about is like we're putting. I mean, if you want to talk about an extinction event, you get a bunch of human beings that can't feed themselves, don't know how to do anything, and are just solely connected and need power to them to even live or eat or do anything, and then have something go wrong with the power like significantly. Good luck. Like good luck.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, I watched Adam Carolla did an interview of Kevin Costner about his movie Horizon. It's so good. You really should watch it.
The movie or the interview?
The interview.
Oh, okay.
I watched the movie afterwards. I thought the movie was good. But anyway, there he was, Adam Carolla was kind of saying this kind of what Lance just said, the kids today, they're used, because I was watching this old Western, and seeing this kid get really, what's the word? Inventive about, he took 2 horses and he rode off and then he switched horses and, all this, right? They were talking about that scene. And then Kevin Costner said something I thought was really good. He said, just raise them right. You don't know what they're capable of until the time comes. You might think they won't be able to survive, but you'd be surprised,
Yeah.
And I think that's really true, actually. So even if these kids are like walking off cliffs playing Pokemon or whatever it is,
well, those ones
like
they're walking. I mean, like you say, there are some things. So are your kids physically fit in some way, right? Part of like working outside and having to do that, can they actually handle some sort of physical fitness? Do they have?
If your kid is overweight and diabetic, the apocalypse will not be kind. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the comfortable, Jeremy, which is, one of the things. Well, so you get to live in Canada where it's, you get to deal with just the cold that hurts your face when you walk outside in the winter, right? But then you get to deal with the mosquitoes in the summer, which is always there's always some sort of challenge there. We were in Houston and a hurricane came through and a lot of people were without power for a long time. And it's hot and humid in Houston or whatever. But I grew up in a house without air conditioning. And we grew up in Nebraska. We got all 4 seasons. We'd get 20 below in the winter, and then we'd get 100 and high humidity in the summer. So we got everything. But like literally, I kept saying this. Yes, it stinks. Like it stinks. Your refrigerator goes bad. I do not want to be without power for 2 or 3 weeks because
I don't either.
Right. I don't. Mm-hmm. But like literally, I grew up without air conditioning, and we survived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most cars didn't have air conditioning when I was a kid.
No, air conditioning.
You roll down the window.
Down at 65 miles an hour.
Cold. You put a wet towel in there, roll down the window a little bit, and that would help. And then the towel would get all dry, and then you'd have to wet the towel again. But I lived in a dry climate, so that actually worked. That helps, right? But even then, it was
it's dry here too.
My truck still doesn't have air conditioning. I drive a '73 Chevy.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
part of the ascetic practice.
that's like you not having a cell phone. Like I have a Prius with air conditioning and I love it.
See, no, one thing I was going to mention too.
Trust me, I love air conditioning.
Yeah, no, I love getting home. Trust me. Like I love getting home to my air conditioned house and walking in and like, thank God. But I also thank him for the heat, right? So it's good. It's like, it's all good. But go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to bring this back to St. Martin because we're talking about this because he slept on a bed of sackcloth and ashes. He wore camel skin, which is, I'm just going to guess it's probably pretty thin, like goat skin. because horses are like that too. They have thin skin. It's not like a hide, like a cow.
Mm-hmm.
These animals are thin skinned, and when their hides dry out, they're not very soft. They're actually
Right.
kind of not very nice. And so this is not, let me just think about this. Like he's not doing that, or him and I think his monks, right? His community
Mm-hmm. Yep.
lived like this. They weren't doing this to punish themselves, right?
No.
They were doing this. Take it from there, Jeremy.
They were doing it to renounce their comfort and as a way of seeking and remembering constantly their dependence on Christ, and to not be comfortable in this world, right? To always be seeking Christ in prayer and living in the world to come, and they don't want to be too attached. It's a way of removing your attachment to this world. Removing comforts is a way of removing attachment.
Well, it's okay. Well, I could have a problem with that because they live for the life of the world, right?
They prayed for the world, but
right.
They don't want to be attached to the bodily comforts of the world. It's also a way of subjecting their bodies. It's like a form of fasting.
Like me not having a cell phone.
Yeah. Most monks don't sleep much either for the same reason. It's they're seeking to make prayer the most important part of their life, and they try to do it as much as humanly possible.
So they are literally participating in the creation of the world with God.
Yes. And keeping it existing. Yes.
Existing. Yeah.
Their prayers keep the world together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the point I wanted to make because it's easily misunderstood, I think.
Yeah, they weren't torturing themselves. They didn't like flog themselves. But they did deny themselves comfort. There was a saint who never laid down for like 20 years. He either sat and when he was sitting in a stone chair. Like he was a scribe, and he was doing like he was copying old manuscripts, and he would sit in a stone chair, and then when he was tired, he would sleep in that chair. Like he just didn't let himself lay down. And it was a way of not being attached to worldly comforts. The worldly comforts are a distraction from
that's
God.
What I was just going to say. It's a distraction. It's about not being distracted.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and so if you look at it, St. John of the Ladder, but Evagrius Ponticus talks about this, and then in Dr. Timothy Petitsis' book on the ethics of beauty, he talked about how a little bit of the inversion between like the West and the East, where there's a sense of try to mentally attain things for spiritual growth, and where it's inverted, in particularly in Orthodoxy, like for example, and you can see this in St. John of the Ladder, but it's other things, is like, so for them, the spiritual journey starts with the first step is fasting at your stomach, because you can control that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's literally something you can decide. That's something that you can start with. I can start fasting, right?
Some of us have been trying to start for 4 years.
Yeah.
It's very difficult
for some of us. Right? There are things that I can control in terms of the clothes I wear and where I sleep, all those sorts of things. Those are things you can absolutely control, right?
Yeah.
Shari says, and a lot of wise people say, start right where you're at. But so those are things you can actually control. Yeah. And so if you're trying to go through through a spiritual ascent, right? And to have these places to where you're going further up, further in, and to get to those points where there's revelation and asceticism, where that stuff is, it's you start at those simple things like you just talked about. And those are the things, that's where you can start. And anyone can start there. It does not take an education, right? It doesn't have you don't have to have any lofty, you don't have to have the right doctrine.
Right.
You don't have to have the creed memorized. All that stuff, like literally, these are the sorts of things, these are the simple things that then can lead you up to the other things. And if you can't control what you put in your mouth, like if you literally can't get control of that simple thing, how are you going to have the battles and the ability, when we talk about trying to the real battles of the struggles of your own life? Like we all have our things, right? I mean, the higher, more difficult things. How can you love your enemy? How can you get to that sort of a when you think about, I can't remember exactly how it was said, but Dr. Vineman talked about the measure of your faith is Christ, and then I think how it shows itself is your love for enemies. So if you want to check your spiritual condition while being persecuted, while someone being awful to you, do you have that heart of just love for that person? Like
and feeling sorry for them,
not pity, like just an empathy. And you see it in certain people. So how do you attain that sort of a spiritual mental a state of being, right? And a state of presence and a state of stillness and a state of control over.
And you really don't want to be distracted when you're trying to do that.
And so,
right.
But that all starts out with these things like these. So when you think about the physical things, and I really like that. Like when I read that in Dr. Petit's book, and then I saw Evagrius Ponticus was talking about you start with your stomach and stuff. Like I was like, oh, that just makes so much sense. And then it goes back to your body question. Like, so Shari keeps, why do we have this body? What's the body?
Oh, I know.
Really thinking about that. Like, that's it. And there is something about being in these bodies.
Yes.
And so you talked about it not being comfortable and where he slept and everything. Like there's something about living in this body and learning how to, like you said, not seeking comfort, Jeremy, like these are like to do certain things that somehow that's part of the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
And it's a very different that you'll hear some people, not a lot of them, but there's this idea of Christian hedonism that Piper was really big on that sort of stuff and everything else like that.
I don't even want to know what that is.
You know what it is. You know what it is.
I do.
And so, yeah, and you don't even have to, you just heard it and you know exactly what they're talking about. And it's just this, it's not that.
Okay. That's what it sounds like to me, but I'm not sure. Maybe they've got some theological explanation for why it's good. I'm sure they do, but that just makes me sad.
Yeah, and I shared something. If Father Braga, I went down a rabbit hole after you shared that video with me, Jeremy.
Father Braga?
Yeah, Father Roman Braga is.
Oh.
Then I started going down a whole bunch of his other videos.
Yes,
so good,
yes,
so good. And he was having I shared it. It's about 5 minutes. I'll probably I'll figure out a way to share it. But basically, he was talking about everyone is out looking out here for God, like out here, like they're looking for God out there or up there or wherever that is. And he says that's not where God's at. It's a journey deep into yourself, because it's deep inside yourself. That's where you're going to find God. Like the atom is a universe, right? So it's about this journey in, and a lot of people are very afraid to take that journey, right? But it's the journey in, and it's the journey inside yourself in stillness, right? That's what Jesus' prayer, hesychasm, the practice of stillness or whatever. But it's through that journey in, and the kingdom of God is within you.
I just want to mention this because you're talking about the journey inward, and this IFS stuff is kind of like floating around in the air. I don't like it. Okay, I'll just say it straight up. I don't like it because it's another abstraction, in my opinion, right? Like I've always been fascinated with the fact that as a person, I can be a multifaceted thing, which means many faces. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is what gives us the ability to act. I mean, actors act. You know, we can put on personas. We can, it's very, very easy for people to do. And if you believe that these things are not part of you, then you've just abstracted, I don't know even know how to say it. You know, you went from a materialist who's abstracted out, or maybe you're still a materialist. I haven't really given much thought, but I don't know. How do I say this? This is something I haven't articulated yet. First time I said anything about it. I don't want to call it demonic. I don't want to call it evil. I want to call it stupid and naive. Those are the two words I want to use. Okay? Because I think that we underestimate who we are.
Yes.
That's why.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll think more about it. I'll be able to say more in the future. But right now, I just had to get that off my chest.
When you were talking, Lance, I thought of the phrase "death to the world." There's that magazine called "Death to the World." It's made by an Orthodox monk who came from the punk scene, and he made a magazine in the 90s, and it's still around. But there's a little paragraph I'll share. It's from Saint Isaac the Syrian, and he says, "What do we mean by death to the world?" And this is related to what you were asking as well, Shari, about what they were accomplishing with the camel hair and the deprivation. The world is the general name for all the passions. When we wish to call the passions by a common name, we call them the world. But when we wish to distinguish them by their special names, we call them passions. The passions are the following: love of riches, desire for possessions, bodily pleasure from which comes sexual passion, love of honor, which gives rise to envy, lust for power, arrogance, and pride of position, the craving to adorn oneself with luxurious clothes and vain ornaments, the itch for human glory, which is a source of rancor and resentment, and physical fear. Where these passions cease to be active, there the world is dead. Someone has said of the saints that while alive, they were dead, for though living in the flesh, they did not live for the flesh. See for which of these passions you are alive, then you will know how far you are alive to the world and how far you are dead to it.
Right. So Emily says here, the thing with where is it here? The thing with IFS, it's just one modality, but it's particularly useful for trauma because trauma causes people. Yeah. Okay. So there was no IFS when I needed help with trauma. There was only Jesus. That's all I had. And he told me to love God and to love my neighbors, myself, and to lay down my life for a friend, and to turn the other cheek, and to give to the poor. And, those were all the things that I was actively looking for help. Like, how do I, because I was having intense conversations in my head with all my parts. Okay. While I was ironing, and I ironed a lot when I lived in Switzerland because that was just the way it was. And I actually grew to hate ironing because I couldn't stop having these stupid conversations. And by the time I was finished ironing, I was frustrated so badly because either I had condemned myself to hell or I had condemned somebody else, some other part of myself to hell, right? I was angry. I was frustrated. I was depressed. I felt sorry for myself. It was a pity party. It was just gross, honestly. It was gross. And
ironing became ironic for you? Sorry. I don't know if it's really ironic. I just couldn't resist the pun.
Well, here's the thing. My ironing started piling up. This was the key for me. I was like, wait a minute. I had 3 kids and a husband, and they all needed their clothes ironed. Okay. And I'm like, I got to get this done, but I don't want to go. I can't do that anymore. How am I going to? And so I remember I visualized me wrapping all this stuff up in chains. And it was huge. It was so huge. And I threw I had a chain. I threw the chain over my shoulder and I dragged it all the way to Jesus and I just dropped it at his feet. I said, okay, I'm going to go iron now. That was my visualization. And nothing had, like, no voices, no nothing. I was like, whoa, this is interesting. I didn't think it was going to work, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then I realized how pathetic all those voices in my head were. And all they wanted to do was how do I put this? All they wanted to do was make me angry and bitter and resentful and vengeful and all those feelings, right? And I had every right to feel like that, right? And so I just had to close the door. I had to close the door with forgiveness. That's what I did. I slammed it shut and I said, that's it. And Father George talked about this today. Somebody asked him a question in the Q&A afterwards in that video, and they said, the politician, I don't know what, it was like 2006 or something when that video was made? And the new government was looking for names of these torturers in these prisons. And so the question was, are you going to give up these names and are you going to hunt these people down? And his answer was absolutely incredible. Like, he said, how do I know that they haven't confessed and repented? How do I know that, they've made these things right with God? Like, and then he talked about his path to forgiveness. Talk about trauma. 21 years in a communist prison, being brainwashed.
Yeah.
He forgave them, and he said, and I don't even remember their names. And, my sister and I have gotten together and we've talked about stuff because we experienced a lot of things together. And she will mention something and I'll be like, man, for the life of me, I can't remember that. And I have a really good memory. Okay. But the door was shut with forgiveness. Yeah. And, and like I said, I'm not calling IFS demonic. I'm not that kind of Christian. Okay. I don't go on some dogmatic rampage. All I'm saying is, before IFS ever existed, I spent a lot of time talking all my part, and it wasn't helpful. The only thing that actually worked for me was forgiveness and laying down my life. And I have to do it every single day, okay? Every single day I have to do it. Which is my version of laying in a bed of sackcloth and ashes. And it's pathetic how it's not always gone. But it, Yeah. So, I mean, I could beat myself up just for that, but I won't. So anyway, I just had to say that.
Well, Shari, so this is Dr. Batist's book. By the way, this is just it's a lot to get through.
Which one is that?
This is The Ethics of Beauty.
Oh, I haven't read that one yet.
And he uses kind of the backdrop. One of the things he realizes, this guy who was trying to work with Vietnam veterans, right? Mm-hmm. And he uses war as his way to work through kind of ethics and so on and so forth. And because you can get in just war theory, which is, there really is no, you can always rationalize yourself to a just war, and like that, they always find their way to have war. But one of the things he noticed was there was a guy who was treating Vietnam vets. And what he found was, and I know this goes against our culture's prime, is that just talking about it, the talking therapy and the focusing on therapy was not working. In fact, it made them worse. Okay. Focusing like all this Western therapy, and we're into this. And so anyway, chapter 4, which comes in 183 pages in, is rescuing the soul from the empire of therapy. And he goes in and he goes throughout this chapter, but you know, basically the psychotherapy that's kind of found in the West, and he's just talked about this whole rational, self-focused, that sort of thing versus the beauty first approach. And he starts talking about what we need is our souls need to be healed, right?
Yeah.
And it's a beauty first approach to that. And so
Right.
when you start talking about forgiveness, right, as a way to heal, it's like that is the way to healing.
Yeah.
Self-focus and getting into trauma and all this other sort of stuff. And
Mercy, right? Mercy.
Yeah.
It says,
Well,
Lord, have mercy.
Yeah, and Saint Martin was called Saint Martin the Merciful, by the way.
Exactly. He was.
But so it's, I need to get back through this. This is one of those things like the super smart kids. Actually, it's pretty approachable. He writes in a, it's not in a, it's not someone like Steiner or someone, which is harder for me.
It's not like technical theological language, right?
Right, but it's just in
a lot.
Yeah, and you know, ultimately, which is, you know, what our sickness in humanity always is at its root. And he goes back to why, you know, things look differently in the past and everything else, is that it's a sickness of the soul. And so what they found with these men, so here's what they found, and he did this with these Vietnam vets, but they also talked about kind of the Orthodox way it's happening is that how did they heal warriors? Like they understood, like it was a couple of years before they could take communion, and that wasn't punishment. Like there was a realization that no matter what happened out there, that you went through trauma. But what they did do is they made sure they invited them into the community meals, and they made sure they were becoming part of the community in the festivals. Like they didn't let them be like, you know, they did this.
They weren't ostracized. They weren't ostracized. They were given time for healing, because here's the thing. We know we need healing. And if somebody glosses over that, it's bullshit. You have been bullshitted. Okay. So at least the church is taking that seriously. And that is helpful if you can take it that way. That means that they care about you enough to give you time to heal. Right. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to say that I had forgiven. I had confessed all my sins to God, and on a regular basis confessed, right? I tried not to beat myself up about it, but shame was always there. Here's the thing. When I became an Orthodox Christian, one of the main reasons that I did it was because I needed to confess before a witness, before a human being. I needed confession before another human being who wasn't going to judge me. And I don't know if, you know, for those that don't know, in the Orthodox Church, you don't confess to the priest. He witnesses, you confess to Christ. That's how the confession works. And the absolution comes from him because it rightly comes from him, because he's your fellow human being. And that's where the shame eats you up. The shame is about, will my fellow human beings still love me if they knew this about me? And that's why you need someone to say, we still love you, right? It's the absolution has nothing to do with God. And well, I mean, it does, but it doesn't. It does and it doesn't. I shouldn't say nothing. It has, of course, something to do with God, but it's a little more intertwined, let's say, in the body of Christ, for example. Right?
Father Stephen.
So anyway, I just want to share that.
Yeah, Father Stephen Freeman. Didn't he write a book on shame? I know that I've watched quite a few YouTube videos. He in his blog he touches on this. I believe he wrote a book about it, but he definitely gives some talks about shame. It's and they're so good. I mean, Father Stephen Freeman is just so good on so many things. But
I also have a book called How to Be a Sinner, written by an Orthodox priest. I can't remember his name, but he also talks about shame in there.
So it's good. So it was really good. So if I can find the link, I might share it on X. Emily, I'll find that link. He has about an hour-long talk on it. It's really good. But what you just described there, until I went through it and then I could map something onto it. So one of the most powerful steps that happens in 12-step programs is what they call the 5th step. Admitted to God and to ourselves. It's important to admit stuff to yourself too. And another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. There's that moment. 4th step is we did a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Oh, that's AA you're talking about.
Yeah. So you write this down because it's so easy. Because here's the thing. And so, yes, you can go straight to Jesus and ask for forgiveness and be forgiven. That's a true statement. Okay.
And you should.
And you should at all time. But here's what you can do. Particularly if you can even just have kind of some belief and it's like maybe he's out there. What you would know is that Jesus is known or God knows everything you've done. So you're not admitting anything. What's really hard is saying that thing in front of another human being, whether they're a priest or your sponsor or someone else. And the same thing happens with a sponsor. Is that someone that you trust? One's going to keep it completely confidential, no matter what you say. There is going to go no further than between you and they.
Mm-hmm.
All the sponsors I've actually done 2 of them. Both of those sponsors, before I started on my 4th step, both shared something with me about themselves that they would not want anyone to know. And by modeling that, what they were trusting me with something, right? But they were also modeling, listen, you can whatever is in there that you need to, it's okay.
Let go of, yeah.
And don't hold on to anything because you're only as sick as your secrets is and everything they talk about there. And you will hear people talk about, and they're very afraid to do it. And in fact, they might have a whole list like of their thing out, but there might be those 2 things that they don't want to say. And I can say this because I actually had a couple things like I wasn't going to say. And then I got in there the first time and I realized I had those 2 things. And then the sponsor asked me, do you have anything else? And I sat there and I said, no, I think I'm okay. And then we sat there for a little bit and we chatted. And he asked me, he goes, you sure you don't have anything else? And the whole time, like, it's on me and then God's on me. You got to tell him, you got to tell him, you got to tell him. So I'm like, yeah, I did. Right. And when you walk out, I'm just going to say, when you walk out of that, and you will hear this over and over, people in 12-step programs that have actually done that. Mm-hmm. They talk about this weight, like just this weight being lifted off. It is the power of doing that. And, again, like we talk about, everyone is a saint. And I think Protestants believe that, but Orthodox believe that too, right? Yeah. There's something like sitting down with another human being who loves you and cares for you, has been on that path, and is there because they want you to be healed, right? They're for you. And in that moment, admitting to God, yourself, another human being. And so to me, like that, there is so much power in that. And relief, and it's what we're supposed to do. And so we've lost that in many ways. We've lost that confessional space in many ways, in a lot of different areas. And not all.
It's a sacrament, though. Confession is a sacrament.
Yeah.
And this was the thing that became more and more apparent to me as I neared the narthex kind of thing in my own mind. I was like, oh, I'm coming for this. Like, I actually told my priest, I can't wait. He goes, well, you could come Sunday morning since you have to travel so far before your baptism, because that was my first confession. And we can just do it early before the baptism. I said, well, when would you normally do it? He said, Saturday, Vespers. I'm like, well, I'm coming to Vespers then.
Yeah.
With bells on. Like, I can't even tell you how important that was. Like, it was like so important, because this was the thing that was holding me at the bottom of the sea. It was my shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was holding me at the bottom of the sea, and I was drowning in it. And no matter how hard I went to God. I needed absolution with my fellow human beings in the world. I needed to know on the horizontal plane, which is what's happening at confession, right? My priest is my witness, right? He's not my confessor. I mean, he's my confessor, yes, but he's not my, it's Christ I'm confessing to. And he is my witness, and he loves me unconditionally. And that's the model of what things should be, you know? And if I'm really honest, I don't think there's anyone, like if I look back over my years as a non-Orthodox Christian and in different church communities, I can't think of anyone that I would have been able to share those things with.
Mm-hmm. And it is important who you share with. So, for example, I think people take sponsorship in 12-step programs very seriously because it's life and death, right? Like, so we really, like, we understand this stuff's life and death, right? And so, and the anonymity, there's such a degree of trust, and you know, you need to be, who you do that with matters, because if you're gonna share all the blood, guts, and glory, like if you're gonna really get that stuff, you know.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing about that, Lance. It's not just about your healing. It's also about loving your neighbor as yourself, right? So I have seen people go out and confess and destroyed people's lives in the meanwhile. Like,
Well,
their confession destroyed families, okay? Like, I don't want to get into the details, but I'm saying, yeah, you know, like it wasn't helpful.
Well, as you go down, the wisdom step is, so now once you do this, and then you pray to God, you know, to help you with all your shortcomings, and then you make a list, and then you go out, and then you start going to make amends. And here's the deal: you make direct amends to people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
Exactly.
Running to your best friend and telling him, "Oh, I had an affair with your wife," because it'll make me feel better to get off my chest, and then I destroy this family, right? So I mean, like something like that.
That's
you know, or
selfish. It's
selfish.
It's totally selfish. And so then what happens is you end up carrying that burden because there's nowhere to bring it. I mean, okay, take it to Jesus. I did that. It didn't remove the burden. Like I said, I was anchored to the ocean floor. I needed somebody who was gifted with the ability to hear that and not judge me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my priest.
Yeah.
And I wasn't destroying anyone's lives in the process, right? Because it was between me and him and God. And so anyway, I just want to, I think this is something that is maybe overlooked or could easily be misunderstood. And even maybe isn't utilized enough within the Orthodox Church. I don't know. Like I'm not part of a community, but that is just the thing that I know I need. And it took me 25 years to find it and to realize what it was that I needed. Like it was like, oh, wait a minute. It's that I'm missing. Right?
Yeah. There was a priest. I was at a monastery, and the priest monk who was the abbot at that monastery was giving a homily, and he was talking about confession, and he said there was a man who came to him who was in his early 90s who just came in and asked if the priest would hear his confession. He said yes. And he said this old man just went down to his knees and started saying, I thank God for this horrible thing that happened to me. I thank God for this horrible thing that happened to me. I thank God for this horrible thing that happened to me. And he went through his whole life and just thanked God for all of the painful and difficult things. And he said, I see now how I needed all of those things to happen. And I just wanted to confess to God in front of someone else that I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for those things.
Mm.
It was another aspect of confession, right?
I'm really, really bummed that I'm not part of a community because of this, because of confession, because I think, like, I haven't mastered the art of confession, if that makes any sense. Like, I know that there's something about it that because it's a sacrament, it's going to lead one into places where they don't even know exist.
Yeah.
But that only comes over time, and I don't, I'm confessing on, to God. But anyway, I just think it's,
and just over time, like as you go deeper and deeper, like more is just revealed and this thing comes up. And the thing about at least how shame has worked in my life, but I think it's the thing that works, is that at least when I'm in those pits and I'm in that places of shame, I'm very isolated. So it's separating me from God and my fellows, right? It's very isolating. There's a lot of fear. It's fear-based. It's all that stuff, right? And in that act of sharing that with another human being, like to overcome that fear, right? And to no longer be alone in that thing. And like you said, it's the lack of judgment, right? And where, again, not every priest can hear confession. Like, I think people are surprised to hear that. Not every ordained priest can hear confession. It's only until they deem you someone that they feel has that maturity and that ability to sit and hear a confession and have no judgment. And that takes a while before you've earned that kind of trust, right? And then so I would just say, for those of you who aren't going to join the Orthodox Church right away, or if you hear about these 12 steps or whatever, there is something very powerful in that. Chad would love to talk about this stuff, and he'd probably help you with that. But you do have to be careful who you're going to share those things with, though. Because the other thing is, some people, if there's not the right person, there are people that will use that stuff against you. There are certain places in certain churches that if you actually confess, you're actually they're going to give you some penance, brother. You know what I mean? And it might be ostracized or whatever. I mean, you have to be very careful. Like, it has, like you said, Shari, it has to be someone who can hear it without judgment.
Well, it's also a sacrament. It's so, like, this is what we make things holy by the kind of attention we give them, right? There's a certain kind of attention that's happening in confession in the Orthodox Church. I don't know what it's like in the Catholic Church because I'm not Catholic, but I'm sure it's the same. There's a kind of attention that makes the whole thing holy that you don't have if you're telling a friend, and believe me, women talk. That's what women do. They love to talk. I mean, actually, I'm finding out men do too, but but man, you're not going to tell all your girlfriends all the details, because they'll also completely shred you to, yeah. So it's not just about talking. It's not just about getting it off your chest. It's about it being holy and sacramental. And
it's in the context of being generally it's in front of icons. You're facing an icon of Christ, and the priest is next to you, also facing the icon, right? Yeah. So I just wanted to add that for people who haven't.
Well, that's why I said you're confessing to Christ, and the priest is your witness.
Yeah, it's a holy context was what I was trying to add to what you were saying.
Yeah, it's a totally holy context.
Yeah, where it's different than, like you said, telling a friend or even praying on your own.
And there are other garments too that the priest wears when he Here's confession.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's a covering there.
Well, anyway, I love this series you guys are doing. It's getting late for me. I've got to get up for work early. Good to see you, Steve.
I'm glad to talk to you,
Lance.
Lance. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Bye-bye.
Sounds like I
Hi,
missed the
Steve.
Saints. Hi.
You did.
Yeah, we talked about Saint Martin of Tours. His very beautiful life. It's good
Okay.
stuff. There's a book called Early Christian Lives. It's a Penguin classic, and it's got like Lives of Saint Anthony the Great, which is also amazing. It's got the life of Paul of Thebes, life of Hilarion, life of Malchus, life of Martin of Tours, and the life of Benedict. That was written by Saint Gregory the Great. So there's some early saints. It was very good stuff.
I think that one's on eBay that I saw.
Yeah, you can get it.
I've got like a ton of icons and books in my eBay watch list.
Yeah.
But so you guys migrated to the topic of confession. It seems like.
Yeah.
Is that part of the saint story, or just something else?
Just kind of organically ended up there.
Moved over there. We started talking about because Saint Martin didn't afford himself a lot of luxury. Actually, to the contrary, he lived, as uncomfortably as he could. So we started talking about that kind of, what is that exactly? It's not necessarily a self-flagellation, but it's more of a distraction, or an attempt to not be distracted away from the task at hand for him, because he was a monastic and he was carrying, this is my way of saying it. He was carrying the world in prayer, right? And he didn't want to forget what he was doing. So, and then from there we moved on to several other things.
Right.
Yeah, there's a passage I didn't share, but there's a part that says he was always praying even when he was reading.
Yeah.
He was always praying. So, yeah, it's very beautiful. But I wanted to go back like 8 topics ago because I had something that I think kind of ties in. It was the idea when we lit life without phones. I was also lamenting this the other day I was telling my daughter, I was like, when I was a kid, my parents' friends would just come over. They just knock on the door and you'd have a visitor. And sometimes you had time to have them come in and they would hang out and you would talk. And they were, we were just in the neighborhood. Thought we'd say hi. Great. Oh, cool. And then other times it was like, well, I'm kind of busy. Could you come back? Oh, sure. We'll come back later. I'll run to town and I'll come back. Or, and then, or it was, we're about to have dinner. Why don't you come in and join us? There was just random visits and it was beautiful. I loved it. And I'm so sad that that's gone now. You have to plan everything and you have to schedule and you have to text and everybody has to, what are we going to bring? And it's just like, it's
stupid.
It's too much thinking. It's too much in your head and too much it is ahead of time. Like, I don't want to barge in and I don't want to be a burden. And it's just like, there's no organic contact of friendship,
I'm wondering how much of that has to do with the difference between a culture of sincerity versus culture of profilicity. So like with sincerity, people come over, you take stuff off the table and then make coffee and then bring out the treats and sit down and talk to them. But with the profile, it's like, my house isn't perfect. You can't come in.
Mm-hmm.
I have to clean it all out and buy special decorations to stick out for you. And you know what I mean? I'm wondering if that has something to do with it.
Gotta light all my scented candles.
Yeah, I can't let people look at the curtain behind the King of Oz, how horrible and plain my life actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's a lot of that actually.
Drop by.
Yeah. You know, when we lived in Telegraph
and,
Creek, we
and
were
like the obligation to be hospitable.
Yes.
Like there was
Well, that's what's
obligation to be
lost in
hospitable. Someone
America.
shows up, you got to treat them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's been lost here a lot, is that, well, and it's both sides of the hospitality has been lost, right? So it's a good thing to be a good host and to make sure that people are at ease and comfortable in your home. It's also, there's a saint, I can't remember the saint, who said it's better to receive hospitality than it is to give hospitality. And it's because of the humility that it requires to be grateful and to not impose too much, like not take up too much space, so to speak, in their home.
you're
You know,
allowing
not like,
you're allowing someone else to extend, like to give up something for you, right?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
Like you're
yes.
giving. There was a really good. I went to this. It was an online thing during COVID, but this lady, she was the Matushka somewhere in Canada, and she was talking about fasting for Lent, and she said that this. How'd that go? I think it was her daughter was in university or something, and she couldn't get home because of weather, so and it was for Christmas, right? Anyway, she went to her best friend in university. She went with her to her house. Well, turned out that they lived in a double wide trailer, and they were grandparents, parents, and an aunt and an uncle and a bunch of kids. Okay. And they didn't hardly have any money. And the only chair, because they just ate in the living room, like they'd cook meals and then go sit on the couch and eat. They only had one chair for the table, for the kitchen table. Oh, it was Thanksgiving. It was Thanksgiving. That's what it was. And they put her daughter, they gave her the chair, the only chair, right? And they all stood around the table, and she was just like, "Oh my God," And the idea was that no, you have to actually take that chair, because this is what you're allowing them the opportunity to give you something, right?
Yeah.
It was actually, I messed that
Yes.
story up badly,
Yeah.
but it was really
No,
beautiful.
it's
But
okay.
part
It's
of the
the gratitude. I mean, it's the humility of being able to accept that,
Mhm.
right?
yeah,
Being able to accept
part of
someone
the
else's love
dynamic.
with grace.
Right.
Yeah, and like you're even kind of in their favor now. I mean that's not, it's not a tit for tat, but it's like they've been gracious to me, and there is an obligation of reciprocity that is not defined necessarily at all. It may never even matter or anything, but it's like that's part of it, and that's when somebody brought that up to me, like go to your neighbor and ask for a thing of sugar when you move in, and it's like, well, I don't need sugar, but the idea was like, because then you owe them something, so you put yourself at their service by going and asking some dynamic of that. And yeah, like when I lived in Japan, the standard thing is if you move to an area, the people will come and bring towel thing, their does or whatever. So,
You're cutting out, Steve. It's hard to hear you. We're getting the Matrix version of Steve.
When we lived in Telegraph Creek, it was so amazing. It was what we really craved actually at the time, because Switzerland was very much like what Steve was saying earlier, where I'd go to drop in on someone, they wouldn't even let me in the door. They would stay out on the deck with me or on the porch, and they'd say, "No, you can't come in." I wasn't prepared, And in Telegraph Creek, I mean, we'd be out there just, covered in dirt and, griming around doing whatever, cutting down trees or working in the garden or something. And then a bunch of people would pull up with some salmon or moose meat. Can we get some veggies? And we'd be like, yeah, sure, grab some. And then you want to come in for some tea? And it was just always, we never had more visitors in our lives than when we lived in the most remote place you could imagine. Okay. They were just always coming and going. Every birthday was an occasion. It was everybody's entertainment. But I have a feeling that now they all have the internet, right? Starlink and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I really wonder what's happened to Telegraph Creek in that sense. Like, because like, yeah, there was no TV, there was no electricity, there was no internet, and we getting together was your entertainment, your social life, everything. It was everything.
Yeah.
And your help. You know,
Yes.
one time we drove from Terrace. And we got home at like 2 a.m. It was like this 800-kilometer drive in the wintertime. And we got to the bottom of our driveway and there was like 4 feet of snow on our driveway. There was no way, and our driveway was like this. There was no way we were getting up there. And we had all our groceries in the back, and we had paint, stuff that couldn't freeze. We had 3 kids. One was 6 years old. And one of our neighbors had gone up to check on our place, I guess, when we were gone. And so there was a snowmobile track up the driveway, and the driveway was like 3 kilometers long. So I think we had like 2 flashlights or something. We gave one to the kids, and then my husband and I were trying to figure out what we absolutely had to carry up that hill. And anyway, it was just. And then one of our neighbors came up the next morning and said, "What do you mean you walked up here? You should have come to our place. You could have slept on the floor. Who cares?" You know, like we're like, "No, it was 2 a.m. Of course, no. Next time, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, this is something. It's really hard to explain this to, I don't know, city people or modern city people especially. But when you live in a rural community, there is a certain grace that has to be there because you do rely on the people around
on
you.
each other.
Oh, you know, when it was hay season, all the young men would just go in a big gang, and we went farm to farm to farm to farm, baling and hauling hay for all of the old guys who couldn't do it anymore. And that was our wrestling practice. That was like our like it was our conditioning for
training,
you know, in the winter. Yeah, I mean in the summer, and so you, even if you don't like your neighbor, you still bring your neighbor treats at Christmas time, and you still go and help them haul hay, and they still come and take care of your, you know, feed your animals while you're out of town. It doesn't like there's something that goes beyond like your personal preference of like who you like and who you want to be with and who you want to talk to and who you find interesting, because it's not right to use the word utility, but there's an interdependence that you have with these people that supersedes your little petty differences.
Yeah, you know, we used to go branding at our one neighbor's place. That was, you know, he'd call and
like branding cows.
Yeah. So it was like,
oh, okay.
Eric, when are you branding? Oh, I'm not sure. And you knew you had to go when he called, right? So you were just like, you literally lived on call until Eric figured out when he was branding. And one of our neighbors, he disbutted all the calves. That was his job. Him and Eric hated each other.
Right.
But Willie was there every year, disbutting.
Yeah.
Right.
To me, like that's what a community is. You know, people use the word community all the time to talk about more like a type of person, you know, or like a member of a formal or informal group. But I think, you know, a community is like they're in each other's lives.
Yes.
It's not a family. You know, because I have family members. They're in my life only because they're family. There's no other reason that they would ever be in my life. And they're barely in my life. Yeah. But like a community is similar to that. There's like there's people who will be in my life.
Years. Yeah. I've lived here for 25 years. Eric is passed now. Willie's still around. I always knew that Willie and Eric hated each other. I never knew why. Okay. It was just, they never talked to each other outside of branding, you know? Or maybe someone needed some hay and then, they'd share their hay, or someone was having trouble with calving and they would share with the calving. But otherwise, these two men never spoke to each other. But here's the thing, they didn't talk about it to everyone.
Right.
They didn't tell everybody what happened.
Right.
It was between them, and that was it. Right?
It'd be just
And you didn't ask.
But yeah, the point is that, it's like, and I think, I'm totally new to this church, but I'm expecting a life like that, like there's people there, and I could like stay outside of it like I do pretty much everything else, but it seems like that's maybe less expected or appropriate there. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the more you dive in, the faster the healing comes.
Which is what I'm on. That's why I'm there.
Right. Like the faster that you just dive in and try to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And just be there, and the bonds just start forming, and you start having conversations, and then you find the people who, you have something in common with, and these things just develop over time. And then, and then someone asks you to be their godfather, and then now you have a group of, like we had so I've been Orthodox for 4 years, and we had a little barbecue at our house for all of our godchildren and their families, and we ended up with like 25 people here.
Wow.
Right. So it's a very intimate connection that we have, where, according to the Orthodox kind of teaching, is that, the godfather, godchild relationship is thicker than blood.
Yeah.
Right. It's a stronger, like, sacred obligation. And I have that connection with a very, like a really deep, heartfelt connection with a whole group of young men in my life, and it helps me too, because now I feel an obligation. Now when I wake up on Sunday morning and I don't really feel like going, I have a lot of guys who are going to be like, "Hey, where were you?" Right. This is the part of the healing. This is what happens. You just get integrated, and it's kind of like when you have like a, like if you get a cut, like if you have a foreign object in your body and your body starts like attaching to it, it starts growing in, and it becomes part of the body. When I first came in, I was like that.
Tree.
Yeah.
We got a lot of those around here.
Yeah. And and there's some people in the AA fellowship up here, and I guess pretty much probably everywhere I've been to, where they kind of get that, and I never did. And I don't want to change the subject, but it's like, this, with this is, I think I've talked about this before. It seems like that's like a very one-dimensional or kind of a quite shallow expression of the faith, whereas the church is like the fullness of it. And so then like a sponsor-sponsee thing is not anywhere the same thing as a godfather godchild relationship.
No.
It's similar, though. It's related. I mean, it's
similar
a
idea.
similar pattern. Yeah, for sure.
There's this without sacraments and without not just alcoholism, all the passions.
Right.
It's just there's so I'm much more attracted to that. Like I kind of feel a little bit aloof. People. I left the AA fellowship for a while because I got tired of people, accusing my my distractedness in my ability to change the subject while I was talking to my alcoholism. And it's like, well, no, I haven't had a desire for a long time. And it's like nothing I did. I just don't anymore. And I have maybe all sorts of problems I'm blind to today, but it's like, it's just, it was just like that. There wasn't enough. I felt there wasn't enough for it to actually be a real community.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Like
know
an
in the
over-
early,
Well,
like
it's a
like
weird
maybe
thing to hold together around, right? It's like a
like
weird
Yeah.
an
thing to,
over focus on the one cause of all your problems.
right, which it wasn't a problem anymore. That
Mhm.
problem had been removed. I mean, and so I like the concept of passions because it's like, yeah, it explains
Yeah.
all of my problems,
Yeah.
you know, which I have
Yeah.
many. None of them are desire to drink or, you know, anything like that. And none of them come up in the fourth and fifth step, you know, like
Mhm.
my problems, they don't come up at all in the program, you know. So but yeah, I have plenty of others. You know, I'm reading some stuff to learn about some more, you know, like
Oh, no. We
Oh,
just
nice.
talked about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
talked about it.
Yeah, I'm
You'll
actually,
have to go back,
I'm looking
Steve, and
for
listen.
structure. What's that?
Mhm. I say you'll have to go back and listen to.
Oh, I will. Yeah.
I did a whole
Yeah.
spiel on what drew me into the Orthodox Church, and
Oh, nice.
like really,
Yeah.
really drew me, and that was confession. It was
Yeah.
confession that I needed.
That's interesting.
I
It's
needed
because
it
to me
so
it
badly.
feels that's one of the big draws. It's like I know I want to I know what I got from AA.
Mhm.
And so like the way I've been describing it's like a prototype of what will happen and what I'll get from orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
You know, there's
Yeah.
another aspect we didn't really talk about, but it's really helpful. Well, two things I'll say about confession. One is I was reading a book written by a psychotherapist who is also Orthodox, and he said he feels his whole mission is to just get people to be Orthodox. And as soon as they are, like as soon as they become a catechumen, he's like, I don't meet with them anymore because the church will do a way better job of healing them than I ever could. So that's one interesting thing that he saw. And then the other thing is that another aspect of this is that your priest, you know, if you live in a same place for a long amount of time, you start to build a relationship. He hears your struggles. He gets to know you.
Yeah.
He gets to know your personality. You get to know him. And there's this relationship that opens up there because, you know, after your confession, it's typical that, you know, it doesn't happen every time, but sometimes the priest will give you a word, you know, he'll give you some advice, or he'll give you an obedience, something that you need to do as part of your healing process. You know, it's not that you're still forgiven. It's just that as part of being healed, he'll give you additional like homework, you know.
It's more like amends as opposed to penance, like
yeah, right, exactly.
Marys.
Right. It's more like he's going to give you some extra medicine.
Yeah.
But
like go talk to that person.
Yes. Or go do 25 prostrations every night for that person.
Yeah.
Right. Stuff like that.
I'm all for that. Yeah.
And what's so you develop that, so then he's able to give you personalized advice and counsel. And you know, most of the time he's there to just tell you it's okay. You're doing fine. And
you're as lame as everybody
God loves you. Yeah, there's nothing unique about your sinfulness. I hear the same thing from every person.
You know you're good when he's snoring during your confession.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of times, you know, I finish, I go, I think that's everything. And he just goes, okay. And he just, that's it. You know, he stands up, says the absolution, and that's it. Right. It's just like, no. And that's something that really helped heal me as well. Cause I had that kind of religious OCD, like the scrupulosity, where I would get really anxious and really terrified because of, you know, doing teenage boy stuff. And then you go to the church meeting and they do the whole, you know, there's somebody in this room that needs to confess kind of move. And you know, and me being anxious anyway, I'm always convinced it's me, right? So then I run in a panic after the meeting up to the leader and go, please, you know, I need to meet with you this week. And he's like, okay, you know, and you sit down and there's this like I just felt so much anxiety. And then, but then I would talk to him and I would feel this huge elation afterward. And it was like it was just as dangerous as the despair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you do the one sinful thing because you're a teenage boy, and then the cycle starts again,
Uh-huh.
And the nice thing with confession is that, so like in the tradition I came up in Mormonism, confession was only for like, big problems.
Okay.
And it wasn't like a consistent thing, in Orthodoxy, like we're my priest says every 4 to 6 weeks, come see me.
Yeah.
And that in itself, making it more routine, helped me a lot. And then the other thing was like, there wasn't such a bipolar cycle of the depression and the mania, because I wasn't putting so much pressure on myself. It was just like, this is fine. Like confession is just like, confession is part of your prayers every night. You're just going to the priest to kind of clean things up with the church and to confess with a witness, right? It's like it's working for you on a different level, and it's requiring humility and a presence of mind and a willingness to face your own darkness, on a regular basis, consistently. And it actually healed me of this like
really important
anxiety, Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it is the same guy that you're going to see tomorrow at liturgy, right? He's the one who's handing you the body of Christ in the spoon, right? And he's like
give him the
right. So
the first time I confessed to the priest that I confessed to was before my baptism, and he was the best. He was filling in because this was a mission, and so he was just showing up for, I think, one liturgy a month or something. And then he did my baptism, but his real job, he was a prison chaplain.
Oh.
So, imagine some of those confessions. I just can't imagine. But anyway, well, guys, I'd love to just visit, but I got to go and put my chickens away and feed my dogs and
back to your embodied life instead of this angels of light stuff over here.
I know I jumped in when the show was basically over, but I was at Baraclosis and I saw, I like to watch something on the drive home, and I saw this was happening. I'm like, oh, right on.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, I'm glad you joined us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully you get a chance to listen back.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
It was a good.
Yeah, I love the this is a great idea. The going through the saints is a great idea.
But it belongs to...
Well, I told Jeremy, I said, if I keep doing this, I'm just gonna bugger off to a monastery. I guess God won't be too happy with me because I'm married. But I keep trying to justify it. I'm like, well, wait a minute. In medieval times, didn't the men and women just go off to monasteries? Maybe I can talk.
They did.
Some of the stories I read, well, they were like brother and sister, I guess. But
yeah, some would agree, but you had to have the blessing of your spiritual father to do that.
Yeah,
it seems like basically, if you can get that, you can kind of do stuff.
Yeah, but
I mean, you can't murder somebody with a blessing because you're never going to get the blessing. You'll never get the blessing, but it's like if it's
no, if he gives you the blessing for that, it's on him, but he won't because it's on him.
Right.
Right. That's the thing. But no, it's they would sometimes, like at the end of their lives, if they were very pious, like when they couldn't have kids anymore and their kids were all raised, that would happen sometimes where the men and the women would go to separate monasteries. And then also, but there were saints that were married. They're married couple saints.
Oh yeah.
Where they like, there was this one saint, I'll have to look up the couple. I can't remember their names. Forgive me. But they would do 100 prostrations a night together.
Wow.
Every night. And they had done that for years and years. Like they did that
abs of steel.
Decades. Yeah. That's no kidding. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to tell you on God that my sister calls my house a monastery.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's what she calls it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Well, go take care of your chickens and your dogs, because even monks have animals they take care of, right?
That's true.
Yes, we have. What am I saying? They have things to do.
Yeah.
But I want to show you something quick before I go.
Parakeet?
It did sound like a bird.
Yeah.
This is the newest.
Oh, a little chick.
Oh,
Hello, little birdie.
oh wow.
Baby
That's
chick
fun.
hatched yesterday.
Ah,
Ah,
that,
Say hello, baby.
cheep,
that's
cheep.
fun.
Yeah, the
I was
nesting.
just
the
waiting
nest
for
with
his
some little
brothers and
birds.
sisters to come
What?
out.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I didn't
that's
know
fun.
if you could hear him before, Jeremy, but he was they like to be in the hair.
Oh,
yeah.
But when you were talking, when you were reading the story, it was cheeping really loud because he could hear your voice.
Oh,
So he's
fun.
responding.
he's like, I love saints.
You know, this one time we were at my daughter's volleyball tournament and it hadn't gotten started yet. And we were down there early, right at sunrise. And it was kind of down in this, it's like in an industrial park, but it was, kind of rural. And there was a river there and there was like some fields across the river. And so I was like, I'm just going to go for a walk while we're waiting for the game to start. I went out for a walk and there was like thousands of birds that just all kind of flew in within 3 minutes and they all start singing.
Wow.
And I was just like, wow, I get to stand here and listen to matins
That's
with
awesome.
the birds, right? Like, let everything that hath breath praise the Lord. It was so beautiful. And they just sat there for like 15 minutes, just ba 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 ba, just this amazing bird noise. And then all at once they just all leave. Yeah, it was
that's
beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Let everything that hath breath praise the Lord.
Yeah. Well, on that note, hey Matthew. Matthew's arriving and we're gonna close.
Oh, we're just leaving Matthew.
I'm just gotta get this chick out of my hair. Excuse me. So I can sign off. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And
Thanks.
we'll be back on Tuesday, I guess, Jeremy?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry for the difference this week. I had some personal stuff I had to take care of yesterday, but we'll be back on schedule next week. So Tuesday, 7:15. Well, 7:15 in Mountain Time, which is the only one that matters. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve, for joining us. Bye, everybody.
See ya.